other areas to look at as well that might be considered, and this was something that we talked about before. There are explosive bolts all over, and other kinds of explosive devices all over the shuttle. Explosive bolts that are designed to send off the solid rocket boosters at 2 minutes into the flight. Explosive bolts to jettison the external fuel tank. If one of those had gone off prematurely, that certainly would have caused an explosion. But there's all kinds of redundancy and safety devices supposedly to prevent that from happening, but obviously something went wrong, and that's what they have to find out.
Robert Bazell of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena tonight, where he has been covering the flight of the Voyager spacecraft. That was a spacecraft flight of triumph, of course, sending back pictures from Uranus of those remarkable moons that we've all been seeing. Krista McAuliffe, the school teacher who was selected from more than 11,000 educators who wanted to fly in space, was easily the best known of the astronauts who died today. But the other 6 are not to be forgotten either. NBC's Tom Pettit tonight on this tragic loss of bright, dedicated people.
The crew of Challenger was distinguished, some more famous than others, but truly all-American.
I'm joined here at the Cape by astronaut Dick Scobie, who is to pilot the mission of STS-13, and our science correspondent Bob Bazell.
Dick Scobie, the pilot, had appeared on the Today Show during a launch in 1983. He was 46.
And I'm sure there'll be some problems to take care of along the way, which will be a challenge, and be able to come back and say I've done it, and hopefully go do it again quite a few times.
Smith was the co-pilot. He was 40. Judith Resnick, America's second woman in space and the first Jewish woman. And she was a TV expert on the Today Show.
And we get to do a little bit of everything and state of the art, and it's always a challenge.
She was 36. Krista McAuliffe was a high school teacher in Concord, New Hampshire. Her selection to be the first teacher in space had overshadowed the flight itself. She was 38.
I just took that chance, along with 11,000 other people, that it will give them maybe the inspiration to try something new and to take a chance.
11,000 other American teachers had lost out to her in the competition to be the first teacher in space. Ronald McNair, PhD in physics from MIT. McNair was the second black to have been in space, going for his second trip today.
You know, that wasn't the kind of thing a black kid thought about. You know, how do you get to do something like that? What do you do? And I pursued science with that in my mind, and it wasn't until recently that I saw a break to make a dream, you know, come true.
He was 35. Ellison Onizuka was 39. He was a Japanese-American from Hawaii. This would have been his second flight. He liked space work.
That's great. What a way to live.
Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Air Force. The 7th crew member, Gregory Jarvis, engineer. Jarvis had been bumped from 2 previous flights to make room for politicians. Today was to have been his day.
I've been charged up since last March, and so this is kind of a culmination of a dream come true.
It was an all-American crew. Tom Pettit, NBC News, New York.
Today's shuttle mission had special meaning for teachers everywhere, of course, and the launch was watched in many classrooms across the country by students of all ages. One of those was the Centerville, Ohio classroom of James Rowley, who was the runner-up in NASA's search for the teacher astronaut. Also in that classroom today was Mike Conway of NBC affiliate WKEF in Dayton, Ohio.
It's lunch hour for these Centerville High School students, but they wanted to be in class, to be with science teacher Jim Rowley. The students knew what the shuttle launch meant to him. Rowley was one of the semi-finalists for the Teacher in Space flight. And besides being on the flight, Rowley said the best place to be was with his students, helping them understand this historic flight of the Challenger.
Main engines are on. 4, 3, 2, 1. Salt rockets. You're right.
The interest soon turned to bewilderment. For a few minutes, even Rowley didn't understand what was happening.
Go about 45 seconds after liftoff, a huge fireball.
I don't understand.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Our director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point.
Can we get the cameras?
The reaction of all of us across the country today when we realized that this was no longer science fiction, that we were dealing with reality. For President Reagan, this was to have been an upbeat evening. Mr. Reagan had planned to set out his agenda for the coming year in his State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress and the nation tonight. But that speech, understandably, was postponed. The president telling the nation instead that this was a day for mourning and for remembering. NBC's Chris Wallace followed today's events at the White House. Chris?
Tonight, the flag above the White House was lowered to half-staff. The president ordering a similar show of respect at all government installations. In a speech to the nation, Mr. Reagan called the accident a national loss and spoke directly to the school children who had watched it.
It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave.
The president had embraced the space program in part to blunt questions of his age, to show he was future-oriented. He proposed a teacher in space in his re-election campaign. And despite today's tragedy, he said the shuttle program will go on.
We'll continue our quest in space. There will be more shuttle flights and more shuttle crews, and yes, more volunteers, more civilians, more teachers in space. Nothing ends here.
Mr. Reagan was to make his State of the Union speech tonight and planned to go ahead even after the accident, saying you can't stop governing the nation. But the speech was postponed for a week after congressional leaders said there was no interest in politics tonight. And the fact is, the president was as powerless as everyone else today. A spokesman said Mr. Reagan was informed of the accident by the vice president and, like everyone else, rushed to a TV set.
Quite frankly, the president stood there in almost stunned silence as he watched the television. You could certainly read the concern, the sorrow, the anxiety on his face as he watched, and the group watched around him.
Late today, the president still had no answers, but had found words to remember the shuttle crew.
We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God.
Tomorrow, the president will perform one of the toughest parts of his job, calling the relatives of those who died on the shuttle. And later this week, he plans to attend a memorial service organized by NASA. Tom?
Is there any talk at the White House tonight of making extraordinary efforts on the part of this administration to reach out to teachers in the country and to school children as well? I was struck by the fact that the president made a special appeal to students tonight in his address, and also when Vice President George Bush arrived at the Kennedy Space Center today as the official representative of the president, he also spoke to the children of the country. Obviously, the White House is worried about the traumatic effect that this could have on kids across the country. Are they planning anything beyond what we heard today, Chris, that you know about?
Well, nothing specific that we've heard of, but I know that the president takes his role almost as national father very seriously, that he was shaken as he watched on TV, as all the rest of us did today, and he kept talking in a brief conversation with reporters about how terrible it must have been for the relatives, both children and adults, who had gone to the Cape to share in all the excitement and instead had been eyewitnesses to a terrible personal tragedy. I know that when those young servicemen died in the plane crash in Gander, he felt very strongly about going to Kentucky to a memorial service and meeting personally with all of the relatives there, and I'm sure he plans to do the same with certainly the relatives at a memorial service organized by NASA, and in any way he can to ease the pain and to gain some understanding in all this, not only for the school children, but for all of us.
And are any of the aides at the White House tonight talking about the wisdom of the civilian in space program? It was the president's idea to put a teacher in space after all. A lot of cynics at the time thought it was just a, if you will, an election year gimmick to pick a teacher who happened to be a woman, who happened to be from New Hampshire, to go into space. And now, of course, we've had this tragic loss. There's already a program in effect for journalists to go in space as well. Are they having second thoughts about all that at the White House, Chris?
They certainly are sad, and they certainly, you know, a lot of these people had personally met Krista McAuliffe in the Roosevelt Room right across from the Oval Office. Just last July, she had been selected as the teacher in space, and many of them had met her. But I don't think there are any second thoughts. One of the points that the president made over and over again today was that space is the safest form of travel ever known to man. There had been 56 manned space flights in the American program. This is the first time that during a flight anyone had been lost. He and his top aides are all determined that nothing in this one accident be allowed to kill the space program.
It's worth pointing out that Senator Jake Garn of Utah, who was A veteran of the space shuttle program, as well as one of the politicians in space, pointed out today that very statistic that you just talked about, and said each year 50,000 people are killed on the nation's highways, about half of them by drunk drivers, and we ought to be more exercised about that. Two NBC veterans of the exploration of space from its beginnings are NBC's Roy Neal and Jay Barbary. They have been covering this story now for more than a quarter of a century, but they've never seen a darker day than this one. Jay, as you can see, is at Cape Canaveral tonight, where he is always posted, and Roy Neal is at Pasadena at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory there. Roy, let's begin with you. 19 years ago yesterday at Cape Canaveral, the other deaths that were involved in this space program, on the launch pad, Apollo 1, in the capsule, astronauts Chaffee, Grissom, and White. What are your recollections about what happened that day and how they compare with today?
Well, the biggest recollection I have, Tom, is to relate that fire, which it was, in a pure oxygen environment, to what happened today, and to say there's no comparison, no basis for comparison. That